Hi, this is Annie of ByAnnie.com and Patterns by Annie. Thank you so much for joining us today for Live with Annie. As usual, we've started the stream a bit early. This helps us get everything set up and broadcasting properly to our various platforms. You can find a countdown clock on the screen showing how long it will be until we actually go live. While you wait, please connect with us and other viewers in the chat. Let us know where you are from and whether you're a new or longtime viewer. We'll see you live soon! Thanks again for joining us for Live with Annie. We are so happy to have you with us today. While you wait for the program to start, we hope you'll enjoy the content playing on screen. There's so much inspiration, so take a moment to tell us what you love in the chat. Don't forget there is a countdown clock on the screen so you know how long until we go live. Hi, it's Annie again, reminding you that we'll be going live with this week's episode shortly. There is a countdown clock on the screen showing how much time is left. You've got just enough time to grab some water or a beverage of your choice and a snack, and to connect with us in the chat. We'd love to hear what you've been working on this week. Again, it's Annie, back to remind you that we'll be starting this week's live very shortly. We've got a really fun episode planned for today, and we'll see you soon. Hi, I'm Annie of ByAnnie.com and Patterns by Annie. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 21 of Season 3 of Live with Annie. Since it's been a while since our last Live with Annie episode, we thought we'd do something extra fun today. So we're having a sew-along for our free pattern Piecekeeper, which makes this handy little zippered bag. It's perfect for storing and carrying all your project pieces or supplies. Fabric quilted with soft and stable makes a sturdy base, and the mesh front gives great visibility of contents, plus a bit of added stretch. As you make Piecekeeper, you will learn lots of basic ByAnnie techniques that will apply to other ByAnnie projects too. And I'll share some tips for customizing the bag, so stay tuned. First, before we start, I want to say welcome back to everyone. We ended up taking a little longer break than we'd planned, and we are so happy to see you all again after that time away. While we were off, we worked on filming videos for upcoming patterns. We traveled to Chicago for the H&H Americas show. I also dealt with COVID that I caught while in Chicago, and I traveled to Montana to visit my daughter and her family. That trip was cut short due to my bout with COVID, but I managed to get there in time to enjoy the 4th of July and some fun times with my 5-year-old grandson. We caught turtles and tadpoles and enjoyed lots of outdoor time. It was a really nice break. I hope that you are all enjoying a fun-filled summer or winter, depending on where you live, too. and we thank you for making the time to be with us today. We know there are lots of things you could be doing with this time, and it really means a lot to us when you join us. If you enjoy these episodes, please take a minute to follow us wherever you are watching. And if you know someone else who you think might enjoy the information that we share, we'd love it if you would tell them about ByAnnie and Live with Annie. The easiest way to do that is to just tag them while you're watching. That will take them directly to the episode and they can watch it too. Also, we love reading your comments, so please be sure to interact with us throughout this presentation. Ask any questions you have about the Piecekeeper project, share your tips and tricks, and tell us what other projects you are working on. We want to know what you think, and we love learning from you too. Also, be sure to add any questions you might have in the comments or chat, and we will do our best to answer them before we close. In our last Live with Annie episode, way back in early June, we welcomed the team from Sew Tights here to announce their brand new game-changing product, the Sew Magnetic Cutting System. Anyone who has struggled with slipping while cutting, who wants more accurate cuts for all types of materials, or who simply needs cutting to be easier is sure to love this amazing new product. If you missed that episode or you want to watch it again, remember that you can find all the previous 121 episodes of Live with Annie on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, or at ByAnnie.com/live. We will put up all the links to make them easy for you to find. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit here and then I'll head to the machine, but let's get started on our Piecekeeper bags. So as I said earlier, these handy little zippered bags are perfect for carrying your project pieces, your sewing tools, travel needs, games and toys, and more. And they really make great gifts for anyone and everyone. As you make Piecekeeper, you are going to learn lots of ByAnnie basic techniques, and those will apply to our other projects too. We are going to start by making the bag as directed in the pattern, and then we're going to talk about some ways you can customize it and apply the skills you learned to other similar ByAnnie patterns. If you haven't already downloaded the pattern and videos, remember Piecekeeper is a free downloadable pattern with a full step-by-step tutorial, and it's available at our website, ByAnnie.com. To make things easy for today's stream, we have also created a blog post, and that includes a direct link to the PDF pattern, plus each of the add-on videos, and they're all in one place. We will put up the link so that you can find that easily. Just note that that post is only going to be up until July 31st of this year. So if you're watching 2023, if you are watching this video after that date, you will need to access the pattern and add-on videos the normal way by using your digital library on our website. And if you're new to that process, here is a really quick run-through. So the first and most important thing is be sure that you are logged into your account at ByAnnie.com. This is really necessary so that the system knows where to put your downloaded pattern and videos. If you don't already have an account, you can set one up easily. Just remember to pick a password that will be easy to remember or to make a note of it. Then add the pattern to your cart. And while you're there, be sure to also add the add-on video for Piecekeeper too. Then check out, paying $0 because they're both free. And then to access the pattern and videos, you'll need to go to your digital library. You can find that by clicking on Digital Library under My Account on either the top or the bottom menu bars. Once you're in there, go to the Recently Purchased Downloads folder and click on the bar that says See All Purchased Downloads. If you have just purchased the pattern, it should be right at the top of the list. If you purchase others after it, you may have to scroll a bit to find it. Then click on the blue bar under the pattern name to download the pattern and put it somewhere where you can easily find it. I usually use the Downloads folder on my computer. Then you can work from your computer or tablet, or you can print the pattern. I prefer to work from a printed pattern, so I print it, put it in a sheet protector to protect it as I work, and I'm ready to go. All right, at the top of that same digital library screen, you are also going to see a button that says Recently Purchased Videos. So click on the See All Purchased Videos button, and again, if you just purchased the video, the add-on video for Piecekeeper should be right at the top of that list. If it's not, remember that you can do Control F and find videos and patterns that you previously purchased. So just hit Control F, and there's going to be a little search box that will open up right at the top of your screen. And it's kind of hard to see, so you have to know it's there. But once you see it up there, type Piecekeeper, and then the videos will pop up for the project. All right, I am going to head over to the machine, and we will get started with our project. It's a little bit of an obstacle course to get over here, but I made it. All right, so to make Piecekeeper, you are going to need some basic tools and supplies. The pattern basically calls for fat quarters of 3 different fabrics. There's going to be a main fabric that you use for what will become the back of the bag and also the front border, a lining fabric which will be used for the lining of the bag, and that's what you will see through the mesh front. And then you'll also use that lining fabric for a lining on the border so you don't have any raw edges showing. And then the third fabric will be used for the bias binding that goes around the outside edges and the handle. I didn't bring any bags over here, but the bags that I showed you before, you could see I got a variety of looks just by varying the fabrics that I used. And you can certainly mix and match fabrics if you choose. So you could use more or less. Just know that if you change things around, you're going to need different amounts of fabric. For the project that I'm going to make today, I am using some fabric that was already quilted. So I have my main fabric and my lining fabric. I didn't have leftovers of either of those for what would be cut out of those, so I picked just a third fat piece that was a little bit larger, and I'm using that for not only my border and border lining, but also for my handle and my bias binding as well. You're also going to need some small amounts of several other products. Whew, my mouth is not working very well today. So you're going to need a 13 by 18 inch piece of ByAnnie Soft and Stable, and that's what you use to quilt your main and lining fabric to give really good body and stability to your bag. You're going to need 1/4 yard of some fusible interfacing, which stabilizes the handle and border. We like to use Shapeflex 101. You can find it on our website using the SKU SUP179, but basically it's Shapeflex 101 made by Pellon, easy to find at stores everywhere usually. You'll also need an 8.5 by 17 inch piece of ByAnnie's lightweight mesh for the mesh front, and a 24 inch single slide zipper, and then threads to match the fabrics that you've chosen. We like to use So Fine number 50. It's a 50 weight polyester thread, and it just works really well. You're also going to need some basic sewing tools for this project. So you'll need a rotary cutter as well as a cutting mat and some quilter's rulers. And for this project, I used a 16.5 inch square and a 6 by 24 inch ruler. You'll also need a sewing machine. I'm using my Bernina number 530 today, and I'm using 2 different feet. So the main foot, which I use the vast majority of the time when I'm sewing, is my Bernina number 37, which is a 1/4 inch foot. I like using it because it's open in the front, and it makes it really easy to get a nice accurate 1/4 inch seam, as well as a nice 1/8 inch seam. I'm also going to use my edge stitch foot, which for my machine is the Bernina number 10, and I use that when sealing the edges. I also often use it when I'm doing top stitching on handles and straps. I recommend using a 90-14 top stitch needle, and again, we like to use So Fine number 50, which is a 50 weight polyester for this. You're also going to want some small scissors, some little snippers, wonder clips, pins, and of course your ByAnnie stiletto and pressing tool. I truly don't think I could sew without one of these in my hand, and you'll see me using it throughout the project. You're also going to need a 2.5-inch circle template. And I swear I had one of those out. Here it is, buried on my table. We're going to use this for rounding the corners of the bag. I like using the circle rulers that Creative Grids make. These come in a set of 5 sizes. We use all of them in our projects. It makes it really easy to cut. It's got a grippy bottom so it doesn't slide. It's always really accurate. You can use your rotary cutter right along the edge and it doesn't cut it away. You could also use the bottom of a cone of thread. Superior Threads cones are exactly 2.5 inches, so that's another option. Or you can use a paper template. And this particular pattern doesn't have a template in it, but we do have a PDF on our website that has circle templates that you can trace either to make paper or plastic templates. And to make that easy to find, we recently made that circle template a free product on our website. So Jake's going to put up the link to that product for you. Since it's now a product, you also can just type circle in the search box and it will pull it up as a product and you'll be able to download it there. All right, so that's everything that you're going to need for the project. So the first step in the pattern 1A is to get everything cut. So if you haven't already cut your pieces out, I gave you some homework over the past couple weeks, so hopefully you've got that done already. But if you haven't, go ahead and get that done. So when you're finished, you will have 13 by 18 inch pieces of main fabric, lining fabric, and soft and stable. You'll layer those with the soft and stable in between. You'll quilt those, and that will be used to make the body of the bag. You will also have a front border, which was cut 3 by 17 inches, and a border lining. If you made it according to the pattern or cut according to the pattern, this one will be cut from the main fabric, this will be cut from lining fabric. As you can see, I cut both of mine from my coordinating fabric. You will also have a handle, which is 4 by 12 inches, cut from your coordinating fabric. Interfacings that are cut to the same sizes for the handle and the border. You'll have a square that was cut for your bias binding, your mesh front, and that will be it. So that's all the pieces. This is a really quick project to prepare for because there's not a ton of stuff to be quilted or to be cut. All right, after you have everything cut, the next step is to quilt. So you should have already completed that as well. That's step 1B, and that just involves layering the 3 pieces and quilting them together. If quilting is new to you or you need some help with that step, there are a whole lot of tips in the add-on video for Piecekeeper, so be sure to check those out. Once those pieces are quilted, then you are going to cut an 11 by 16 inch piece, and that's going to form the bag back. So again, as I said, I used leftover quilted fabric from another project to make my bag, so I just skipped straight to that part of the pattern and cut the 11 by 16 inch piece from my pre-quilted fabric. All right, the last step in part 1B quilt is to seal the edges of the quilted piece. And I just want to remind you that this is a very important step in any ByAnnie pattern, so don't skip it. It's a few little words and it's easy to miss, but don't skip that part because not only does it secure all the layers, but it also helps to compress them. And that is really helpful on projects that have lots of layers. So I see every once in a while somebody will post a picture and they'll say, I can't even get this project under my foot. How am I supposed to sew through this? If you seal the edges for each piece as you go, you'll be amazed at how much compression takes place, and it really makes it easier to sew through lots of layers. There are several ways that you can do sealing the edges. The basic method and the method I use most often is to just sew 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around that piece. And to make that really quick and easy, I put my number 10 edge stitch foot on my machine. I move my needle position over so that I'm 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and then I just butt the fabric up against that little guide on the foot, and boy, I can fly all the way around. And that is what I did on this edge and this edge of this piece. Some people like to use a close zigzag stitch or another stitch that compresses the layers more. And when I do that on my machine, I like to use the number 8 honeycomb stitch, as it really helps to compress those layers. And when I do that, I set the width to about 4 and the length to about 1.5. And actually, I think I did a little bit of each. So this, I think, was done with a zigzag stitch. And then on this edge, I switched to the honeycomb stitch. So the honeycomb stitch does back and forth a whole lot. And it really helps to compress those layers. Some people will even use a serger on the edge, but the important thing to know is that when we assemble this bag, we're going to sew everything together with a 1/4-inch seam. And we don't want the stitching from sealing the edges to show. So just make sure that whatever stitch you pick is less than a 1/4-inch wide. And so when you're picking the width for it, I would suggest about 4 millimeters. That works out to between 1/8 of an inch and 3/16 of an inch. All right, so that is our piece quilted and ready to go. I need another quick drink. And then we're just going to set that aside and we're going to get started on step 2, which is prepare components. So this is kind of follows the same format as most ByAnnie patterns. We've designed them so that you get all the parts and pieces made first, and that way when it's time to assemble the bag, everything is ready to go, and boy, it comes together like magic. So before we start sewing, here's another important note. We are often asked, what seam allowance am I supposed to use for this project? So we generally sew with an accurate 1/4-inch seam. Sometimes though, we'll sew with a scant 1/4-inch, a generous 1/4-inch, an 1/8 inch, a 1/2 inch. So rather than list the seam allowance for every single step in the pattern, we add a note to the pattern indicating that you should sew with an accurate 1/4-inch seam unless otherwise noted. And we put that note in the pattern right at the place where you do your first sewing. So in this pattern, you'll see it right after where it says step 2, prepare components. It says use accurate 1/4-inch seam unless otherwise noted. So that's a common thing that you'll find in most every ByAnnie pattern. All right, then we'll move on to step 2A, which is preparing the bias binding. And for this step, you are going to need the 16.5-inch square that was cut from coordinating fabric. I actually have already made my binding because I wanted to save a little bit of time today, but I had another square of fabric left over. It's not quite 16.5 inches, but you'll get the gist. So basically what you're going to do, and it doesn't matter what size your square is, it's going to be the same process no matter what. You're going to cut that square in half diagonally from corner to corner. And it doesn't matter if you cut from here to here or there to there. It's going to work out the very same either way. So just line your ruler up on there so it aligns with each corner, and then get your rotary cutter and cut all the way across. All right, then we now have bias edges on these long edges of each of these triangles. So we're going to join these together to make a parallelogram, and we will cut our strips from that. So what we're going to do, and this is kind of my easiest way to explain that, we're going to take the two triangles and we're going to lay one on our work table so that it makes a mountain. So the peak on this one is at the top. Here's the base of my mountain here. I'm going to take the other one and position it so it makes a valley. So on that one, the peak is at the bottom. Then I want to sew these together on this edge right here. So I'm going to take this one over, I'm going to fold my valley onto my mountain. I'm going to line those up so that I've got my little dog ear sticking out on each end, and then I'm going to sew those together. So usually in the pattern you'll see this laid out like this, so that's another way you could do it, is take this and fold it over, but I find it easier, you've got to fold it like this, I find it easier to do the mountain and the valley, and that always works for me. Here's another little tip. Once you get it laid out like this, I was teaching this in Chicago at a class, and I said, then you're going to sew across here, and someone said, it looks like a pair of women's breeches, and you're going to sew across the waist and not up the crotch. So that's another easy way to remember where you're going to sew. So put those together, let your little dog ears hang out on each side. You'll pin those together, and then we're going to sew that together. And I'm going to go ahead and do that so that we can see the whole step on this. And we're going to sew this again with an accurate 1/4 inch seam. Once you've got those sewn together, you're going to press that seam open, and I would take that to the ironing board to do it. And then you are going to cut your strips from that piece. I'm not going to cut from this, I just wanted to show you how to sew them. So we're going to cut, this is the really important thing, is make sure that you are cutting on the bias edge, which is these 2 long diagonal edges. If you cut your bias tape like this, you end up cutting on the straight grain, and you end up with binding, that straight grain binding that has a ton of seams in it, and you basically wasted all that effort. So make sure you're cutting this direction. So I just take my ruler and line it up on here with the 2 1/4 inch line and cut. Here's a tip. This was about a 12-inch square when I started, I think. And I can easily lay my ruler on there, but a lot of times you've got much bigger squares and you can't. So here's a tip about how to align these and cut them without having to use a great big ruler or a great big mat. So if this seam was pressed open, it would be easier to see. But we're going to take this and basically line it up with that center seam. We're going to bring this edge over the same way, and you want to make sure that this is nice and even and this is nice and even. And then you can lay your ruler on there and cut across, and you've got nice, easy to join strips. When you're ready to join those 2 strips, let's just look at one here that's already done. Or here, let's look at this end. And to this end. So when we're ready to join the 2 strips, well, that's not going to work because that one's going the wrong direction. I probably should have turned my iron on and cut that, but we can cut this here, and then we've got them going the right way. All right, so let's say we've got these 2 strips and we want to join them. This was something that was really hard for me to learn when I first started making bias binding. Trying to figure out how to line those up and get them so that I had a nice straight piece when I was done took me a lot of doing. So here were some tips that helped me. First of all, I lay the 2 strips out like I want them to look once they're joined. So I can make sure that that edge matches that edge, and that's where I'm going to join them. Then I just take this piece and I fold it over on top of that so my right sides are together. And again, I offset those tips on each end. And then I'm going to sew from here to here, sewing a nice accurate 1/4 inch seam. Now, if you have those off a little bit and you go to sew that, your pieces aren't going to line up. So here's another little tip that I found really helpful when I was learning to do this. And that is to just get I'm going to use a pen because I don't have a waterproof marker here. But mark yourself a 1/4 inch line from the edge right on here so that you can see where you want to sew. And then, so again, we've got that. That's going to go there. Then line it up so that that point is right where your fabric is here and here. That way you're sewing from cleavage to cleavage is what I call them. But if you sew right on that line, once you join those and press your seam, your pieces will line up exactly. So I'll sew all my strips together. I'll take it to the ironing board, I'll press those seams open, and then I'll come back and I'll trim off all those little dog ears, and then I've got a nice long piece of bias binding ready to go. I like to, as soon as I've got that done, take it and fold it in half and pin it every 3 to 4 inches to make sure that my layers are all together, and then it's ready to go when I'm ready to bind my piece at the end. So the thing that I've learned is that pinning rather than pressing yields a much smoother, wrinkle-free binding and saves some time slaving over a hot iron too. So then we can just set this binding aside, and we won't need that until the very last step in our project. All right, our next step is to prepare the handle. And I've also got that partway ready to go. So I was trying to avoid having to turn the iron on, but we may have to turn it on later. So again, we cut a 4 by 12 inch piece of fabric. So you've got that you cut from your coordinating fabric. You also cut a 4 by 12 inch piece of interfacing. So your first step is just to fuse that handle interfacing to the wrong side of the handle, and just follow your manufacturer's instructions to do that. Then we're going to take that piece that has the interfacing fused, and we're going to fold it in half and press it. That's going to mark the center of the piece. Then we will open the piece out, and we will bring each of our raw edges into that center crease and press it again. So that's going to make a 2 inch by 12 inch piece. Then we will fold that in half again to make a 1 inch strap, and we're ready to go. Our next step will be to just top stitch all around all 4 sides of this. You can use your edge stitch foot, as I said earlier, so you can put that against that. Turn that so you can see it a little bit better. Move your needle position. On my machine, which is a 5 millimeter machine, I move it all the way over to the left and stitch around. I'm just going to use my 1/4 inch foot today. That's the foot that I use on most of the bags that I make. And let me show you how I know where to sew on this. So on this machine, if I have the edge of the foot against the edge of my fabric, then I know I'm sewing a 1/4 inch from the edge. If I align the inside of this toe that sticks out with the edge of the fabric, then I'm sewing 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So that's what I'm going to do on this. I want it to be about 1/8 of an inch from the edge because I don't want those edges lifting up. And I like to start on the end that's open and stitch down that, and then I'll finish stitching all the way around. I'm going to change my stitch length to about a 3.0. I think for top stitching, a little bit longer stitch looks good. So when I remember, I do that. I had a heck of a time on this project trying to decide what color of thread to use. There were so many colors in it. I swear I had my snippers out here earlier. Jake, can you look and see if there's some snippers in that catch-all caddy over there? I don't know what I did with them. That's all right. I'll just use these scissors. I like my snippers better because I can get right up close to the thread and cut it a lot closer, but scissors will work. All right, so I've got my handle stitched all the way around. I can set that aside, and our next step is to prepare the bag front. So for this step, you are going to need the mesh front, which was cut from the mesh, a 24-inch or longer single slide zipper, and the front border interfacing, and border lining. So I've got one where I've already attached the fusible, and then I think I'll use that one for the lining. I'm going to turn my iron on so that it's ready when I need it. All right, so our first step is to attach a zipper to the mesh front. And note that this is a little bit different than our usual method of attaching a zipper, so pay attention. Because we are sewing through mesh, which is see-through, rather than attaching the zipper with the right sides together like we usually do, we are going to sew this one with the wrong sides together. That makes it easy for us to hide the mesh's raw edges on the back side. Note that if you want to use vinyl for your pocket instead of mesh, you are going to use this very same process. And here are some tips for making this easy. So first, position the mesh front on the table, and it should be wider than it is tall. And then close your zipper all the way to the end, and I like to just take my zipper and position it right side up at the top of the mesh piece. I want it to look like what it's going to look like when it's done. Since I'm right-handed, I want the zipper to close on the left, so I make sure that the zipper slide on the closed end of the zipper is on the left side. And this is what it's going to look like when it's done. Then I just turn the zipper over so its wrong side is up, and I slide it under my mesh pocket, or I put my mesh pocket over it. So now I've got wrong sides together. So this is my right side of my mesh, there's my wrong side of that, there's my wrong side of the zipper. So again, I make it look like what I want it to look like when it's done. I flip it over so the wrong side's up, and I put my wrong sides together. You want to let your zipper extend on either end, mostly so that you can avoid the stop and have a nice straight piece to sew with. I also want to let my zipper extend on this long edge beyond the mesh. And as I was getting ready for this sew along today, I noticed that the pattern doesn't include that note. So I would recommend that you get a pencil or a pen and add a note to your pattern for step 2C1A and to any ByAnnie pattern that doesn't include that, unless it tells you to do something specifically different. But letting the zipper extend beyond the mesh or fabric really helps us hide the raw edges of the mesh once we're ready to finish sewing the zipper in place. So that's just kind of a standard thing that we've learned, obviously, since we wrote this pattern, but it really helps make attaching zippers easier. So add that to your pattern. So then I'm going to let it overhang a little bit on each end, and I'm going to clip that in place. I like to sew with the zipper on top, so when I put my wonder clips on, I'm going to make sure that the flat side is up on this side, the colored side is down. And I'm going to just put them every few inches. If you clip this while your mesh is laying flat and clip it fairly well, that's going to also help make sure that you don't stretch the mesh as you go and end up with a wavy pocket. So again, I've got that clipped all the way across there, and as you can see, my zipper extends beyond my mesh by about 1/8 of an inch at the top. All right, now we're ready to sew. And because we let the zipper extend that little bit beyond the mesh, I like to sew this with a generous 1/4 inch seam. And again, the pattern doesn't say that, so make sure you add a note. We learn new and better techniques every day. It's not always possible to go back to every pattern and incorporate them, so I'm really glad that I got the opportunity today to share those tips with you. So to make a generous 1/4 inch seam, again, I like to have my zipper foot right on the edge of my fabric. I just move my needle position over 1 click to the left. The sides of my zipper foot, or my 1/4 inch foot, are going to run right on the edge of this and right up against the teeth, which is going to make it really easy to sew a nice straight seam, and then my seam is going to be just a little bit wider than the 1/4 inch. On this particular foot, I can't go any more than that 1 click, otherwise I'll break my needle when it hits the foot, but 1 click is enough. So then I'm just going to sew from one side to the other using that stitch.
Move that clam up.
Yeah. I kind of have a mess out here, don't I? Is that good?
Yep.
can't see. How's that?
Yep.
Whoops. Make sure you take the wonder clips out before you get to them. So as you're stitching, if you see any of those little tips of your mesh sticking out, you're going to see them when you press your zipper over too. So make sure you pull your mesh back just a little bit. So when we're done, we've got our zipper sewn in place all the way along that edge. And now our next step is to just finger press our zipper tape over flat onto the front of the pocket, and we're going to stitch right along the very edge of that zipper tape. The end of the ByAnnie stiletto and pressing tool makes that an easy step to do, or just finger pressing. I don't ever do this part with an iron. I just use my pressing tool for that. All right, and then we're going to sew right along the very edge of this zipper tape, and if there are any edges of mesh sticking out, go ahead and push those back in. I shouldn't have any. One thing that I do recommend when you're sewing a zipper on mesh is that you pick thread that matches your zipper, because both of those lines of stitching are going to show, and if you're a little bit inconsistent in your stitching, no one will be the wiser. That was part of the reason I decided to go with green thread today. All right, so I've got my zipper attached to my pocket or my mesh fabric, and I'm ready to go. That enclosed all those raw edges under there, and it looks really nice on the outside of the piece. The next step is really important on this, and that is to trim the height of this pocket. We want the height of this to be 8.5 inches high, so that when we attach our border on here, it's going to match the height of the body of our bag. So because I never know for sure what size ruler or zipper someone's going to use, how accurate their stitching is going to be, we always allow a little bit of extra there and trim it so that we know the pieces are going to be just the right size. So I'm going to grab my ruler. So I want 8.5 inches. So I'm going to line the 8.5 inch line with the top of my zipper. Sometimes you kind of have to just pull on that mesh a little bit. I find that if I go a little bit above it, I can usually grab the mesh and pull it into place, or grab the zipper and pull it into place. But I want that to be a nice straight line across there. And then I just hold that in place, grab my rotary cutter, cut that 1/2 inch or so off the bottom. All right, so we've got our zipper attached to our mesh front, and now we're ready to attach the border at the bottom. So again, if you haven't already fused your interfacing to your border, do that first. And then we're going to take our pocket, and with right sides together, we're going to align that interfaced border on top of the mesh. And this is at the bottom of that mesh front. And I'm going to put a few clips on to hold that. I think it will be easier if I stand up. All right. Then we're going to take our border lining on. What's wrong? Sit down.
It might get a little bit loud.
Okay, if I'm standing up. Okay. Then we're going to turn that piece over, and we're going to align our border lining on top of that. You could do this in 2 steps. You could sew that on with a scant 1/8 inch seam and then sew your border lining on. I know we've done that in some of our other patterns, but in this pattern, we wrote it to all be 1 step. So we're going to take this one, and what I will usually do is clip a few clips on here in between where the other ones are, and then take these and adjust them so that they include all of everything. So basically we are sandwiching our mesh window in between our border and our border lining. Just like that. Once everything is clipped in place, then we're going to sew through all three of those layers, stitching along that long clipped or pin edge. And since the pattern doesn't give us a seam allowance, then we know that this should be sewn with an accurate 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to make sure to remember to move my needle position back to the center. And actually, I'm going to move my stitch length down to 2.52. I like to do my assembly with a 2.5 stitch. Then we can open those border pieces and carefully press those seams toward the fabric border on each side. I usually will press along here to set my seam and then bring that one over and press it, and then I'll flip it over and do that. Can you see me if I'm over here at this, or should I move it?
You're going to want to move it.
All right. Oh, you know what, Jake? It's off. Did we blow a fuse?
So, but it's on a completely different outlet, so I don't know what's happening. But one other light keeps going out.
Yeah.
Will you try to switch it again? I'm going to turn this other light down.
So
should be good.
we have so many lights on back here that sometimes we have trouble with blowing fuses. But we'll try this again. So we're going to start with this one. So I like to, whatever I want to press to, I like to have that on top. And I'm going to first press to set the seam. While we're waiting for this iron to get hot, let me tell you a little bit about this iron. It's my very favorite one. It's made by Reliable. It has a separate steam generator. It has a separate steam generator in it, so even if I have it on the lowest heat setting, I can have really nice steam, and it's really great for steaming a finished bag or pressing seams. We are going to do a live with Annie pretty soon on pressing, and so we'll talk more about it then, but if you're looking for an iron that you'll love, this is my favorite. The only problem is Jake, it went off again. Well, we're just going to pretend that I'm pressing this because this electricity back here is not cooperating. Hopefully there's enough heat in there that it will press it at least a little bit. You could do this with the pressing tool end of your stiletto, but I much prefer to press using an iron. There's a little bit of heat in here. If I had some steam on there, it would be much better. But your goal with this is to make sure that you can't see that lining on the other side and that you've got that pressed really well. We're going to call that good on there. I am going to show you one other tip that is not, again, included in this pattern. Jake, I'm just going to unplug this so we don't run the risk of having something else go wrong. So one other little tip that we've learned is doing understitching on borders and things, and that is a really helpful step for making sure that your lining turns under. And so I'm going to show you how to do that on here. So whichever piece is your lining, you want to have that on the right so that you're sewing through it. And the seam allowance that attached all those three pieces together, you want to make sure that it is pressed so that it's underneath your lining. So just take that then and put it under your needle, and you want to sew 1/8 of an inch away from that seam. So I'm just going to kind of pull the fabric apart since I didn't get a good pressing on it. And I'm just going to sew 1/8 of an inch all the way down that piece through just my lining and my seam allowance. Whenever we do a welt pocket, we do this. You'll see it fairly frequently in ByAnnie, more recent patterns.
You're starting to lose it. If you can keep it flat once it comes out, yeah.
All right, so if you ever see understitching in a ByAnnie pattern, that's the process. So once I've done that, then it's going to be much easier to have that hidden behind there. Now what we want to do is do a little line of top stitching on here. And you can do that 1/8 of an inch from the edge, 1/4 inch from the edge, either one, it's totally up to you. I'm going to put a few pins in there to hold those layers together, since I didn't get it pressed really well. I'm going to do about 1/4 inch from the edge. And I'm going to go back up to a 3.0 stitch. All right, so that is ready to go. That is the front of our bag, and we are going to set that aside because now we're ready to bring everything together and get our bag assembled. I'm going to grab a quick drink of water, Coke. And we're now ready for step 3, assemble the bag. So for this, we need the bag front that we prepared in the previous step, the bag back, which we cut from quilted fabric and sealed the edges on, the handle, which we prepared in step 2B, the bias binding that we prepared in step 2A, and we need that 2.5 inch circle template or circular object of some sort. All right, so our first step is going to be to attach the prepared bag front to the lining side of the bag back. So on mine, I decided I want this to be visible on the back of the bag. This is what I want to be visible through the inside. So just make sure you've got it positioned with the top at the top if you're using a directional fabric, and then take your prepared front and line it up on here. You're going to align it so that the top of your zipper is even at the top. Your sides are going to hang off on either side. We always cut our mesh a little bit bigger so that we can account for any wonkiness or something, but we're just going to clip that in place on the top and the bottom, and then we're going to sew them together. So again, you can use pins for this. I much prefer to use Wonder Clips. I don't have to worry about pokes, and they're just quick and simple and easy to do. I've got my top clipped in place. I can take these pins out of here now. My bottom should match perfectly since we trimmed our mesh before we attached our border. And then it's going to extend on either side. You could put some clips in there, or clips are hard because it's extending beyond. I'm just going to put couple pins in each side. For this, I like to use these big yellow top quilting pins because they don't bend when I put them through the soft and stable. There we go. Now we're ready to sew it together. Now, to make this easiest, we recommend that you start stitching at the top left corner of the bag, and you're going to see the reasoning for that really soon. So I'm going to start there, and on this I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around. When I attach my binding with a 1/4 inch seam, I don't want to see any of this line of stitching, so by sewing the 1/8 of an inch seam, I'm going to make sure that it's hidden. And take my stitch length back down to 2.5, make sure my needle position's in the middle, and I'm going to go all the way around, again starting at the top left corner.
Need to clear out what's in that binding too. Thank you.
When you get to this edge, you kind of have to guess where the edge of it is, but you can pretty much see and just eyeball it down that edge. Go slow when you go over your zipper tape so you don't break a needle. And on these sides, we're not sewing 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the mesh, we're sewing 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the quilted fabric. I find that the stiletto is helpful down here at this edge to kind of put right against the edge of the quilted fabric to help me also tell where that edge is. You'll also note I hold it at a 90-degree angle to kind of hold my layers together, and it keeps the fabric from pushing away and giving me a pucker at the end. So here's a really important tip. Before you sew all the way to the top of the bag, make sure that you move this zipper slide to the inside of the bag. And that's where you're going to see the reasoning for why we started stitching here. Because this is already sewn down, when we move that zipper slide to the inside, the zipper's held in place and it doesn't lift up and get all wonky, and it helps us keep these edges of the zipper tape together as we sew across the tape. And again, just go slow over the zipper teeth. All right. Once you've got that all sewn in place, then you can trim the excess zipper tape and mesh on the sides so that they're even with the edges. I find this easiest to do if I put it so that my main fabric side is up and the mesh and the zipper tape are laying flat on my cutting board, and then I can just run my zipper right along the edge of that quilted fabric. I don't even need to use a ruler. Doesn't that look nice? All right, so that's our bag body. Our next step is to attach the handle, which I threw over here. So we're going to flip this piece over so that the back is up and our top is at the top. And we're going to make a small little mark about 5 inches in from each side on that edge. So it's not going to show up terrifically well, but I only need it for a minute, so it'll be fine. All right, so 5 inches in from each. Then we're going to pin our handle inside those marks. I like to put the side that had the folded edge to the inside, where it was open to start with, the finished edge on the outside. So that one's going to go right there. And just make sure that you don't have any twists in your handle as you put it on there. That one's going to go right there. And then we're just going to sew across that with an 1/8 inch seam to hold that in place. I'm going to stitch that from, I'm going to move this zipper slide back over here so I'm not running into it. And I'll stitch it from this back side. And I just go back and forth over it. I want it to be good and secure. I'm going to sew through that again at least twice, 3 times when I attach the binding, but it doesn't hurt to have it strong. All right, we are almost done with our Piecekeeper bag. All that's left to do is round these corners and bind the raw edges. Again, we're going to do this a little bit differently than the pattern instructs because we've learned more since we've gone, but maybe make some notes. So when we first wrote this pattern about 5 years ago, it told you to take your circle ruler, align it on the edges, cut to round the corners, and then seal the edges. But if you do it in that order, you are going to find that on these edges, especially where you have the zipper, your zipper is going to come apart, or your mesh is going to pull away from the edges. So instead of cutting along the edge and then sewing, we are going to mark along the edge, stitch inside those lines, and then we'll cut. So you can do this from the front or the back. I like to do it from the front so I can keep my eyes on this zipper. And I'm going to just grab my marker and mark all 4 of my corners. So the secret when you're using a circle ruler to round corners is you line it up in the edge. I am going to trim this bottom edge a little bit. Since I didn't have an iron, my border isn't quite even with the edge, and it's going to be helpful to have a nice even edge. That's better. All right, so take your circle ruler, line it up so that when you touch the edge here and you touch the edge there, you're touching the edge, and then just mark around the corner of that. Here I'm going to have to move my zipper slide. All right, so we've got all our corners marked. Now we're going to stitch and then we're going to cut. So just a little bit different order than in the pattern. And I'm just going to go all the way around the bag to do this. I think it'll be just as fast as doing each one individually. So I'm sewing so that my stitching line is 1/8 of an inch inside that marked line. When you get to the zipper, just kind of hold your zipper teeth together. Now we can round those corners, and you can either just use your scissors and cut along the marked lines, or you can use the rotary cutter and circle ruler. We'll do it both ways. So on these bottom ones, I think I'll use the rotary cutter and ruler. So I'm just positioning it the same way it was and cutting. May as well do that all the way around. You can also use your scissors to just cut along those marked lines. I find that when I get to where the teeth are, I kind of have to saw a little bit to go through all the layers. There we go. All right. Our edges are rounded, and now we're ready to bind the edges to give it a beautiful professional finish. And for that, again, we're going to use the 2 1/4 inch bias binding that we made earlier. Since I like to sew my binding completely on by machine, I am going to start by attaching the binding to the back of my bag first. If you prefer to stitch the folded edge of the binding once it's done down by hand, you might prefer to start on the front and then do the binding on the back. But I strongly recommend that you try doing this project completely by machine. It's small, it's flat, it's a perfect project for you to practice on. So that's my recommendation. All right, I like to join my ends of my binding with a diagonal seam because that's going to be nice and flat. It's not going to have any bulk. And I want to do that where I have the most room possible. So I always try to start my binding on the longest edge that I have and somewhere where it's least visible. So bottom's going to be probably less visible than top. So I'm going to leave my tail right here in the middle, and I'm going to start sewing over close to one of these edges. So I'm going to just let my binding be lined up with that, put it under my machine, and I want to sew this with a nice accurate 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to work my way all the way around the bag, and you're going to notice that I'm using my ByAnnie stiletto and pressing tool a lot for this. The sand ground tip is really going to help me position it and hold it in place as I go. There's several tips that I'll share as I go, but the main things are make sure that your binding is folded in half and pinned, and that you're keeping the edges of your binding even with the edges of the bag as you go. Keep your binding nice and flat. Use your fingers to smooth it out. You don't want to sew any creases or folds in the binding, and you want to make sure that you're keeping your foot parallel to the edge of the piece and that you're sewing with an accurate 1/4 inch seam. It's a whole lot to pay attention to. So why focus on those first 3 things? Knowing so long as I stitch with a seam that's a 1/4 inch or less, I can always go back and refine that later. So I don't really concentrate on an accurate 1/4 inch seam so long as I'm going less. So I'm just going to get this sewn in place. And again, I'm starting close to this corner, leaving a tail for joining. And you can see here, I'm just going to use my fingers to flatten that binding so I'm not sewing any wrinkles or crease in it. The other thing is I do not pin my binding to my project as I go because I stretch it a little bit as I go. Not a lot, but enough to keep it kind of taut. I don't want to have any wrinkles or creases in it. And again, I'm keeping the edges of my binding even with the edges of my bag. don't forget that you've got that zipper pull under here, so pay attention to that as you go so you don't run it. I'm going to pull it way over here, and then when I get close to this edge, I'm going to move it back. You don't want to hit that zipper slide. I have more than once actually sewn right over it. You don't like to do that. So you can see I'm using my stiletto to hold the binding at the edge of my bag, and I'm using my fingers to make sure it's nice and flat. So I'm not sewing any wrinkles or creases in it. And I'm stretching it a fair amount, especially around those corners. And going slow as I'm going over where that zipper teeth are on the other side. Piecekeeper is a really good project for practicing your bias binding because it's flat and small and not a lot of layers. Right, I'm going to go until I'm just about an inch past this corner. Okay, and now I'm ready to join the ends of my binding. The Piecekeeper video has a really good demonstration of how to do this. Easy Does It, the video for that one, also goes through it. So I'm not going to talk about all the steps. But I'm just going to do it really quick. So I'm going to take the binding and stretch it just a little bit, this longer edge, and pin it to my bag. And then I'll take my other one over and mark where the points intersect. The top point and the bottom. So if you need help on this, make sure you watch those videos because they go through it slowly and completely. All right, then I can undo this. The main thing is I want to make sure I'm cutting my binding on a diagonal at the right spot. Then I like using these little triangle rulers because they don't take up a lot of room, but any small ruler is going to work. It's just, this makes it easy because I've got usually close quarters and I don't have a great big ruler in there. So I lined that with the 1/2 inch mark on those 2 pins. I take this ruler and butt it up next to it so I know where to cut. Get that ruler out of the way. Scoot this up about 1/8 of an inch because I want a really nice tight binding. Cut it and then join my ends. So wouldn't you know, I'd end up with 2 seams right next to each other, but sometimes that's how it works. Then I offset my tips with my little dog ears on each one. I put several pins in here because even on a flat piece like this, it often wants to pull away, and I don't want that to happen before I get it sewn together. I'm going to sew that with a nice accurate 1/4 inch seam. And then I'm going to press that seam open. And your little pressing tool on the stiletto is perfect for this step because you don't want to have to turn your iron on just for that little seam. So we'll get that pressed open. And then we'll trim those little dog ears so they're even. And then we can finish sewing that binding in place. And you'll see it's a little bit taut on there, but that's exactly what I want because then it's not going to be wrinkly. So we've got our binding attached. Now we're going to turn it around to the front. And before I stitch this down, I want to test its placement. So I'm going to turn it around all the way around. You're going to see here the reason I don't like to press my binding. Did you notice that little bit of a wrinkle that was in there? And I was able to just press it out with my fingers, massage it out of there. Had I had a sharp crease in there, that wouldn't have been nearly that easy, and I probably would have had a wrinkly binding. So what we're looking for at this stage is, let's see if we're going to be able to see this. So right here is the line of stitching that attached the binding to the bag. I want this folded edge to go just past that line of stitching so that when I sew just inside this folded edge, my line of stitching is going to be right here on this side and basically fall out in the same place on the other side. If my binding goes way too far past that, like right there, then when I stitch through there, my line of stitching is going to be way out here and it's not going to look as nice. So I want to make sure that this folded edge is just past that line of stitching. If let's say it's right there and I position it like that and this is loose out here, then I'm going to get wrinkly edges out here. So I want to make sure that I'm pulling it tight against the bag and it's just right there. I can see on a lot of this that it's going a little bit further than I want it to. So the solution to that is to refine my stitch. My stitch probably wasn't a full 1/4 inch seam. It may have been a full 1/4 inch seam, but because I'm only going through one layer here, it will be nicer to have maybe a generous 1/4 inch seam. So I'm probably just going to take another trip around this to make that be a little bit wider. If I see anywhere where this doesn't quite get to the edge, like sometimes I find that especially on corners, there's a couple things I can do. I can either trim some of that fabric away. I can take my stitching out and redo it, which I rarely do. Usually I would just trim it. Or I can just take my stiletto and you can see how I can pull it over. That's usually what I end up doing, is I want to make sure that it's covering that, and I think I can do that without doing any trimming there. So I'm just going to take one more quick round around this to make sure I've got a nice 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm going to stitch it down. I find that almost every time I have to do that because my stitching usually ends up being less than a 1/4. I just need to decide where to start so I make sure I end up at the same place. I'm going to start in this corner. The nice thing about this is it's already sewn down. I don't have any pins in the way. I'm not paying attention to the edges, so it's really fast. And an extra line of stitching helps to compress the layers, so it's super easy to do. Yeah, on this bottom edge I was really narrow. Don't forget about that zipper pull. Yeah, up here at the top I'm really narrow too. Now I'm just going to bring it back around, clip it all the way around the edges, and then I'll sew right along that folded edge and we will be finished. Again, see that wrinkle I've got in there? I can just use my fingers to massage that away and boom, it's gone. This fabric that I'm using for this project is a new line from Sue Penn for Free Spirit Fabrics, and there's a bunch of prints that have really beautiful butterflies and flowers and things on them. Sue's going to be a guest on Live with Annie later this fall, so I'm really looking forward to talking to her and learning more about her process. She basically paints all of her designs that are done on the fabric. And really an interesting lady. Again, if you look at this right here, it looks like that binding doesn't want to quite cover that stitching, but once I get there, I'll just be able to use my stiletto to pull it into place, so I'm not going to do any trimming or anything down there. Same thing here. Probably sewed that a little wider than I should have, but I can make that work. I really strongly recommend that people practice on Piecekeeper to perfect their binding, because I see so many people who just dread the binding, and to me, binding is just no big deal. I've done a lot of bags, I've done a lot of bindings, but once you've learned some basic procedures and how to deal with problems that arise, it just takes all the angst out of it and makes it a fun process. So that's my wish for you, that you'll learn to love bindings too. Bindings add such a beautiful finish to a project. They give it some structure, and they just really they're really worth doing and learning how to do well. And Piecekeeper bags just make perfect gifts, so perfect to practice on. All right, we are going to start on this bottom edge. Just for giggles. You don't want to start where it's hard. You want to start where it's easiest. So it would really help if I had my light on my machine, but it glares, so hopefully I can see where that edge is here. I think I got it. All right, you'll notice too that I'm using my stiletto to really pull that binding in position and hold it. I can keep it there all the way till my needle gets there, and it makes a huge difference. So I'm grabbing that binding, I'm positioning it just past that line of stitching and sewing right inside that folded edge. Sometimes I even insert the binding in between the two layers or the stiletto between the two layers of binding if I see a little wrinkle, and I can use that to pull those out too. move this zipper slide out of the way so I'm not running into it. Don't forget to go slow over those zipper teeth. Keep those handles folded down so you're not sewing those somewhere you don't want them. If you have any loose threads, push them up underneath that binding too. You don't want them sticking out. Again, wonder clips are so essential for this. They make it so much easier trying to hold that binding in place as you go. Easier than pins. Some people will do a little drop of glue basting on there, but to me the wonder clips are just so simple and easy. Save a lot of time. And enable me to adjust as needed if I'm not set in stone until I'm there with my needle ready to stitch it down. This is when I wish I had my snippers here because they make it so easy to get in there and snip those little threads. I always like to snip the first ones before I stitch over them because then I'm not stitching them down and trying to smooth them out. All right. Wouldn't you know, I ran out of bobbin thread 2 inches from the end. Well, we're going to call that a day. I'm not going to take the time to wind a bobbin and finish that, but basically I've got the stitching done. I'm going to bring this up to the table where I can show you that up close, and we're going to examine and see how good a job I did on my binding. I will be up there shortly. All right, my Piecekeeper is mostly done. I have 2 inches to finish sewing down here at the bottom, but I am really pleased with that, how that turned out. If I'm going to have Jake kind of key in on my binding back here, we'll see how good a job I did. So as I said, my goal is that the stitching along the edge of the binding in the front falls out at basically the same place on the back. And most of the way it does, well, right here there's no stitching because that's where it's not stitched down yet. That corner looks good. That corner looks good. The only place where I don't see it is right here. So right here I'm a little bit inside. I'm more in the ditch than on the top, but I consider that a win. I don't say I'm perfect, and that's good enough for me. So I think I'm going to use this to carry my chargers and my cords in my suitcase when I travel. Put a note in the comments and let us know how you're going to use your Piecekeeper. Let us know how far you got. Did you get yours done today? And be sure and send us some pictures. So I hope you enjoyed making this. Before we go on to take questions, I said I would share some ideas for customizing this, plus some other bags that you can make. So let's talk about that. So first, if you want to customize, remember that I always recommend that you make at least one bag before you start making changes, so you understand how things are going to fit together and what's going to be impacted by any changes that you want to make. But once you're comfortable with the process, there are a number of ways that you can customize it. So one thing that I planned to show you today was a Piecekeeper that we made with cork. But it went to the show in Chicago and our shipment hasn't come back, so you're just going to have to kind of imagine this in your mind. But if you want to see the finished bag, check out Season 3, Episode 17, which was a few weeks ago when we showcased projects that we made using some beautiful new cork fabric from Wyndham. Since we didn't want to quilt through the cork on that bag, rather than putting our 3 layers together and quilting them, we quilted just the lining fabric to the soft and stable and then trimmed it to the finished size. We cut the cork at that finished size, which on this was I think 11 by something, and aligned it on the soft and stable size of the side of the piece we had quilted, and just sewed 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around to join those 2 pieces. And then we proceeded just as the pattern was written. Here is a bag that I made to hold some of my tools. And on this, I was using some leftover quilted fabric. To make best use of that fabric, I made it 1 inch shorter. I also made it 1 inch wider because I had longer pieces that I want to put in here. And instead of using vinyl on the or mesh on the pocket, I used vinyl, and I skipped the border at the bottom. So if you want to make a change like that, what do you need to consider? So first of all, know that any changes to the size of the bag body are going to affect the size of the pieces that you need to cut for the back main and lining as well as the stabilizer. So decide what you want the finished size of your bag to be, and then cut all of those pieces of fabric in soft and stable about 1 inch or 2 taller and wider to accommodate any shrinkage or wonkiness that happens when you quilt. Changes to the size are also going to affect the amount of bias binding that you need. In my case, since I reduced the height by the same amount that I increased the width, the circumference of my bag was exactly the same as what the pattern makes, so I didn't have to change anything. I was able to cut the same size square that the pattern called for and have sufficient binding. But if you're going to make a bag that's a whole lot different in size, here's what you need to know to calculate the bias binding. So the first thing you need to do is figure out how many linear inches of binding you need. And so to do that, just add the height of your bag to the width and multiply their sum by 2. So if your bag is 10 inches high, 12 inches wide, 10 plus 12 is 22, multiply that times 2, you get 44, and you'll know that you need 44 finished inches of binding. I like to add a little bit of that to that so I have enough to join the ends. So I usually add about 6 inches, and I'll say I'm going to need 50 inches of binding. Once you find that number, you're going to multiply that by the width of the binding that you're going to cut. In this project, we're doing 2 1/4, which is common in most of our patterns. So 50 times 2 1/4 equals 112.5. Then you're going to find the square root of that number. This is when it's helpful to have a calculator with a square root button. Most phones have that. And when I did that, I found that the square root of 112.5 is 10.6. So I rounded that up. I usually round up by at least 1.5 inches or so. So I'd probably cut about a 12-inch square for the binding on a 10 by 12-inch bag. If you want help with that, we have a little booklet that's available on our website called Math for Quilters, and all of the formulas for calculating the binding are in there. This is a really handy little book to have. It's got all kinds of formulas and math and fractions to decimals and inches to yardage. It's just a handy little reference guide, so one I highly recommend. As I said on this one too, I skipped the mesh and I used vinyl. There's really just a couple changes you need to make for that. There's no need to cut it wider than the bag, so you could cut the piece 16 inches wide rather than the 17 inch that we allow for mesh. If you're adding the border as the pattern directs, you'll trim it once the zipper is attached, so you really don't need to make any adjustments to the height. In my case, I skipped the border, so I just cut the vinyl at the same height as the bag body, and then I trimmed it once the zipper was attached. And as I said before, attaching the zipper to a vinyl pocket is done exactly the same way as attaching it to a mesh pocket. So wrong sides together, sew your zipper, let your zipper's edge overlap the vinyl by a little bit, and then trim it down, so you don't need to make any changes there at all. All right, if you enjoyed making Piecekeeper, we've got a couple of other patterns that I think you would also enjoy. I need a drink. Let me move these Piecekeepers out of the way, and we'll talk about pocket packers and project bags. So this is our project bags pattern, and this is our pocket packers pattern, which is fun to say. So both of these patterns include instructions for bags that are made similarly, but as you make these, you are going to learn some additional techniques. So first of all, you're going to make bags in a variety of sizes. The project bags pattern has 4 different sizes in it. You are going to learn how to make and attach a pieced border, as we did on this one, or to make a plain border that you embellish with decorative ribbon. You are going to make a bag with square corners rather than rounded corners and learn how to make and attach a mitered binding, which doesn't need to be bias. It can be made just with straight grain binding. You are also going to learn, as you make pocket packers, how to attach pockets on both sides and to do multiple pockets. So this pattern includes instructions for bags with 1, 2, 3, or 4 pockets on the front, and then they all have a mesh pocket on the back, and you'll also learn to do handles in a variety of lengths. So all of these bags are really helpful for organizing and storing all sorts of items, and I know you're going to love making any of them, and you've already learned most of the basic techniques. So let's move on now to some questions that you have. Brandy says, lots of thanks for the sew-along. Kind words for how easy you make everything look. Well, it really isn't hard. It just takes some practice, and once you do them a few times, it's going to be really easy for you too. So keep at it and keep trying. Can I repeat the model name of my iron? It's a Reliable Velocity. I'm not sure the exact number on it, but Reliable is a company in Canada, and it's the iron I've used for, not the same iron. I've gone through several models of them, but I really love that iron. It works really, really well. Won't the mesh melt when ironed? If you had a really, really hot iron, possibly, but it's polyester. I've never, ever had any problems with ironing it. And again, because I have such good steam, I usually put mine goes up to 3 buttons. I think I usually do it on 2 or 4 out of, I think, 9. So I do it on a medium heat, and I've always had really great results with that. If I'm using printed vinyl, do I need to use soft and stable? I'm not sure what printed vinyl is, but I'm thinking you're probably talking about the heavier vinyls that a lot of people do bags and purses. You could certainly skip the soft and stable if you had something heavy like that. On the bag, though, if you're using a vinyl like this, even though this is a 16 gauge vinyl, I still really like having the soft and stable on the base because it gives me a really sturdy bag. It cushions and protects whatever I put inside. Plus, it just makes it so easy to sew. Everything is stable and secure, and the edges stay even, and it just makes it super easy to use. What are my favorite scissors and my favorite thread snips? So my favorite snips are these little snips that we sell on our website, and I'm not even sure who they're made by, but what I love about them is that they're curved up at the end. So if you need to clip a thread, you can get this right down against your fabric and clip that thread without worrying about cutting your fabric. And you don't have to put your fingers in them, you just squeeze them, and the ends close and they stay sharp. I don't use them for anything but thread. I don't cut fabric with them, nothing else. But they work really good. Be careful that you don't drop them because they will, the ends will tip or bend and then they don't cut as well. But these are really easy to use, and we have them on our website. My favorite scissors, it depends on what I'm doing, but I really like Kai, Kai, makes a really nice little 6-inch scissor. That's what I was using over there. It works really good. This is a Kai scissor too, a pinking shear that I really like. Oh, here's my Kai scissors. So they've got a serrated edge, so they hold your fabric together and work just really easy. So those are probably my favorite. Karen K. Buckley makes a perfect scissor, it's called, with big handles. I also really like that one. All right, so I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me. I really enjoyed sewing along with you today. I can't wait to see your Piecekeeper projects that you make, so be sure to send pictures to us. Don't forget we have a monthly photo contest with prizes, so be sure to submit your photos there. And to do that, you just click on the photo contest gallery link that's on the top menu bar at our website, and you'll find all the details and how to submit. As always, please ask for any of these ByAnnie patterns and supplies at your local quilt shop. These shops are such an important part of our sewing and quilting communities. It's up to all of us to keep them strong and vibrant. And remember, if they don't have these products, they can certainly get them, either from their favorite distributor or from us, and we're always happy to set up wholesale accounts for them, so just ask them to contact us for more information. Also, we will be vending at the International Quilt Market in Houston in October, which is a really great time for local quilt shop owners to learn more about us and our patterns and products, techniques. We always love meeting our old friends and new shop owners there. So if you are a quilt shop owner, please be sure to look for us in Houston this fall. Also, if you are a ByAnnie fan who will be attending the International Quilt Festival, which is aftermarket, it's a show for retail customers, we are really excited to announce that we are going to have a booth at that show this year. So festival runs November 2nd through 5th. It takes place at the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston. It has been a long time since we had a booth at a retail show, and we really look forward to seeing many of you there. So we'll give you more details as time comes about our booth number and information like that. All right, before we close, we want to talk about some featured local quilt shops of the week. At ByAnnie, we're all about supporting local quilt shops, and we encourage people to vote, tell us who their favorite shops are, what makes them special, and then each week we highlight a store or more during Live with Annie. So today we are going to visit 2 shops, both of whom were regional winners in this year's contest. Go ahead and go down, Shara. And both of whom have ByAnnie trunk shows on display right now. So we're going to start in Grand Junction, Colorado at High Fashion Sewing and Quilt Shop. They were the regional winner for Colorado in this year's contest. The store's hands-on owner, Jeff Vogel, is as passionate about helping sewists succeed in a project and also in making their sewing machines work perfectly. He's known as Bernina Jeff and Sewtech Jeff, and he makes lots of YouTube videos to encourage customers to keep on sewing. Started in 1965, this family business has a 3,000 square foot store with over 2,000 bolts of fabric, including a wide variety of quilting cottons. They are a dealer for Bernina, Baby Lock, and Janome, and they also offer full-service repair as well as knife and scissor sharpening. They also offer a variety of classes, and their classroom is in use almost every day. Angie, who is known as the Bag Queen, teaches many of the classes, including the ByAnnie classes. Customers who voted for High Fashion Sewing in this year's contest praised the store's selection, as well as their friendly, knowledgeable, and helpful owner and staff. Susie wrote, "They are the most helpful people. If they don't have something you want, they will get it, and they have everything ByAnnie." Kay shared, "I bought some beautiful fabric for a very special quilt, and when I got it home, I couldn't make the first cut. I was too scared I'd make a mistake. I went back to the store, and they made the first cuts, patiently explaining what and why they were doing what they were doing. We laugh now, but what compassion when I needed it." I loved that story. Sarah, too, praised the store's patience and compassion, and she said, My mom expressed concern when I moved 2,000 miles away from home. But after visiting High Fashion and meeting Jeff and the staff, she said she knew I'd be okay out here. That's really awesome. I really look forward to visiting that store when I make my next trip to Colorado. They sound like a really great place. So High Fashion Sewing is going to have their ByAnnie trunk show on display in the store until August 5th. So be sure to stop in and tell them Annie sent you. Next, we are going to travel to Kingsland, Georgia to visit the Scrappy Rooster, and they were the regional winner for Georgia in this year's contest. Barbara Jacobs has been the owner of Scrappy Rooster Quilts, LLC since July 1st, 2022, so not all that long. She said, "I got my love of sewing from my mother, an accomplished seamstress who sewed all of her clothes as well as clothes for me and my sisters. In my late 20s, I went to my local fabric store and they were offering a beginner's quilting class. I thought I would give that a try as it had to be easier than putting in zippers. Well, I was hooked after making that first log cabin throw quilt, and the rest, as they say, is history. It was always a dream of mine to own a fabric quilt store, but I never thought it was within my reach. I was in the shop in May 2022 and expressed my sadness that they were closing. I asked if they had thought about selling the shop, and a voice from the classroom hollered, 'I'll sell it to you!' I was surprised by that, but I told her that I was going to finish shopping and then I'd come into the classroom and have a chat. We talked and I investigated the particulars, and in June 2022 took that leap of faith and said yes to the quilt shop. As my mother always said, good things come to those who wait." The store is located in the historic district of downtown Kingsland, Georgia. The retail portion of the store is about 3,000 square feet, and the classroom adds another 2,000 square feet. It's perfect for classes, retreats, and also bunko night the first Monday of every month. The store is open, bright, and very colorful with 1,000+ bolts of fabric. Barbara said, "This is our happy place, and we want it to be just that for all of our customers. This is a place where friends meet friends, where we learn from each other, and where creativity flourishes." Scrappy Rooster Quilts offers a wide range of the best quality fabrics, sewing notions, and quilting classes, all in a family-friendly environment. They also offer professional edge-to-edge in-house long-arm quilting services. Barbara said they held a watch party when the winners of the LQS contest were announced. "We were thrilled when we heard we'd won, and there was a lot of excitement in that room. We have been getting a lot of people from all over the U.S. stopping by the shop who had never been there before or even knew we were there. Thank you, ByAnnie. You helped put us on the map." That's awesome. Customers who voted for Scrappy Rooster in this year's contest raved about the store's service and selection. Rebecca wrote, "The Scrappy Rooster owner and employees go way above and beyond when it comes to service and patience, a most important feature for me. I'm still learning about quilting, and they, being experienced quilters, are always helpful. Service with a smile and a laugh. The shop is a quilter's dream, filled with beautiful fabric, patterns, and notions. Part of the shop is a classroom with plenty of space for demonstration and classes. Scrappy Rooster Quilts also stocks products for those who enjoy embroidery. I love Scrappy Rooster." And Jean praised the fabric selection, the services, the classes, and the owner and staff. If they don't have something you want, then the owner will order it for you. Customer service is alive and well in this quaint little shop in a small town in southeast Georgia. They love what they do, and it shows. And Judy said, "The staff is so friendly and knowledgeable. I get so caught up in the magical displays. I completely forget I'm not a quilter. However, I am the delighted beneficiary of my best friend, who is a master quilter." That's awesome. I loved reading all those comments and learning more about Scrappy Rooster, and they definitely sound like a fun shop to visit. So Scrappy Rooster will have their ByAnnie trunk show on display in the store until August 1st, so be sure to stop in and check it out. Thank you again to everyone who joined us today. We are going to be back next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Mountain Time with another fun episode of Live with Annie, when we are going to give you a sneak peek at Tim Holtz's gorgeous upcoming collection, Color Block. We made several fun projects using this colorful collection, which includes a canvas substrate, and we can't wait to tell you all about them. You won't want to miss it, so be sure to join us then. And until then, happy stitching!